Welcome to the third part of part 3 in the AP Euro covering of the French Revolution. In the last installment, if you remember, we covered the new reforms of the Constitution of 1791, which established France as a constitutional monarchy. We actually left that episode discussing the infamous flight to Varennes, where Louis tried to escape and seek assistance from foreign monarchs to try to help stop the revolution. If you remember, he was spotted by an innkeeper and thus returned to Paris. Now, after the king was brought back to Paris, he did make nice and actually seemed to be playing the part of a good constitutional monarch. However, it was foreign intervention or opposition from abroad that really played into the hands of the radicals at this point and ultimately brought the doom to Louis XVI. You see, Austria and Prussia issued warnings to France. These were known as the Declaration of Pillnitz in August of 1791. They feared that the spread of the revolution would leak into other countries and would cause turmoil in their own countries. Both reactionaries and revolutionaries favored international war as a means to further their own cause. Reactionaries thought invasion and preoccupation with war would cool down the radicals. They'd probably lose anyway, as many of the French officers were émigrés and were already out of there, and the status quo would be restored. The revolutionaries, however, hoped the war and threat of invasion would consolidate the revolution at home, and they felt it had kind of sputtered, and the people were becoming complacent with Louis XVI kind of acting the good role of constitutional monarch. And some of them envisioned that this foreign intervention would help spread the revolution to all of Europe. So Louis XVI approaches the Legislative Assembly with a declaration of war, and they almost unanimously supported it. So, again, the international conflict, initially, France got their butts whooped. Parisians feared occupation by Austria and Prussia. The Legislative Assembly called for 20,000 National Guardsmen from provinces of France to defend Paris. One group from Marseille arrived singing a war song known as the La Marseillaise, which is now their national anthem. So the war looking not so good at the outset. Okay, so it's scapegoat time. As the fear of defeat grew, many people believed that the royals and even the Legislative Assembly were in fact betraying France. The radical groups in Paris organized mob attacks on the royal palace at the Tuileries, and the Legislative Assembly and the king were taken hostage. He was the scapegoat. People believed that the king was actually betraying them and giving secrets out to the Austrians and the Prussians. Now, again, this would be easy for a lot of people to believe because, again, even though we've talked about them having enlightened despots, they're still despots. They're still kings. They do not want the ideals of the French Revolution to come into their back door, their backyard. Additionally, Marie Antoinette is an Austrian. As you remember, her marriage to Louis XVI solidified the diplomatic revolution in 1756. So you have family ties between Austria and the royal family. And anyway, back to what people were starting to demand. People now started to demand a national convention, another national assembly, if you will, to reorganize the government in France. They wanted one based on universal male suffrage, and they wanted this universal male elected national convention to decide the future government of France. This was also triggered in part by the publication in Paris on August 3rd, something called the Brunswick Manifesto. And it was issued by the Duke of Brunswick, the commander of the Allied forces of Austrian and Prussian troops, which basically stated publicly that nothing will happen to the French people if the king is not harmed. This confirmed the popular suspicions concerning the king's treason, that he was involved. The sans-culottes are among the most radical people calling for change, and the Legislative Assembly surrenders power to these radicals, known as the Paris Commune, who call for a national convention, like I said, to drop yet another constitution. Here you see the sans-culottes, the Parisian working class, small shopkeepers, tradesmen, artisans, and they shared many of the ideals of their middle-class representatives in government. And, this is where the revolution becomes more radical. We get into the radical phase. The Legislative Assembly suspends the constitutional monarchy, and a new constitutional convention is called. Obviously this one without a king. Again, as I said, this one would be based on universal male suffrage, and power was passed from the moderates in the Legislative Assembly to the Paris Commune, who were controlled by the sans-culottes. They didn't wear the old knee breeches of the nobility. They wore commoners' pants as a sign of equality, as you see here. And this is why they are called sans-culottes, which sans means without. Culottes means breeches. So take that one to the bank. So these revolutionaries started using Rousseau's slogan of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and they started running the show. And it became a hell of a show, that's for certain. Let's review with an approach I found while researching the French Revolution. These things will help you remember some things. So the causes of the French Revolution, you want to use the acronym MEAT. Okay? MEAT, M for monarchy. Louis XVI was the King of France, and his queen was Marie Antoinette. They had two main problems. Louis wasn't a good leader, he wasn't good at making decisions, and preferred to eat and drink instead of dealing with the country's problems. They spent a lot of the government's money on their expensive lifestyle, their huge palace at Versailles, fancy clothes, and rich foods. People came to hate Louis and Marie. E, Enlightenment ideas. The Age of Enlightenment brought new ideas like the social contract and natural rights. People took up these rights and beliefs and argued that the king was violating their natural rights to life, liberty, and property, so they had to rebel, right? They also believed that, like Rousseau, people were able to govern themselves. They wanted to get rid of the king forever. A, the American Revolution, led to the French Revolution in many ways. Two in particular, it inspired the French people. They saw a group of people overthrow their king and start a democracy. They thought maybe they'd like to do that too. France actually helped the Patriots win the American Revolution by sending soldiers, ships, and weapons. This helped America out a ton, but the cost to France was exponential. All right, this is one of the reasons why France had no money. T, taxes, 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 to pay for the monarchy's expensive lifestyle and to pay for the war expenses like the American Revolution, the War of Spanish Succession, the War of Austrian Succession, and the 7 Years' War. King Louis XVI taxed people a lot. This is unfair because France's social system. In the estate system, the first and second estates didn't have to pay taxes, only the third estate did. And the third estate was the poorest, though they didn't have enough money to spare on taxes. So here's a conclusion, and that ends part 3 of the French Revolution. We begin the next episode talking about the radical phase, and this is where it gets crazy.